Welcome back, guys. Let's talk Logan. I just came back from watching Logan, and I'm gonna warn you before I get into anything in this video, there are gonna be heavy spoilers in this one. Why? Because I don't think you could talk about this movie in any kind of deep capacity without getting into some key plot points. Now, I will get it out of the way from the beginning. I thought this movie was phenomenal. I thought this movie was great. Now, before anybody gets upset and starts whatever, I will say I said this movie was great, phenomenal. I did not say perfect. But I will say, from what we've grown accustomed to getting in these superhero movies, Logan outshines all of them. At least in my opinion, up to this point. And like I said, the movie's not perfect, so I will get into right away the things that I thought were maybe slightly problematic within the movie. And even some of the things that I thought were problems in this movie are still partially only problems because of what our modern mentality is as modern moviegoers. Now, before I get into any of the juicy bits of this movie, the themes in it, the emotional significance, I'm going to immediately talk about just the pacing of the movie and the tone of the movie, which I thought, like I said, were probably where the majority of the problems I had with the movie come in. As for pacing, I thought the first half of this movie was a little slow. But as I say that, I will also say that the first half of the movie was also my favorite part of the movie. See, the first half of the movie plays around a lot with the characterization of these characters that we have grown to love and care about. And I will immediately say this movie would not be successful if it wasn't for Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart. From all the highs and lows that we've gotten from all the previous X-Men movies, the one consistent aspect of those movies that we as moviegoers have enjoyed are Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine and Patrick Stewart's Professor Xavier. So it was nice that we kind of had this fitting goodbye to these characters. This is most likely Hugh Jackman's final go as Wolverine, and boy, I'm gonna tell you, if I were Hugh Jackman, after experiencing this emotional ride that is the Logan movie, I would probably be rethinking this whole, from an actor's perspective, I would be totally rethinking leaving this role. It's just such an emotionally invested role. What they've done in this movie is proven that the previous movies could have been better. So like I said, yes, the first half of this movie is a little slow, but I kind of own that up to my modern moviegoer mentality, that Michael Bay expectation of just seeing a bunch of superpowered individuals go at it with kind of no real order to it. So yes, our brains have been trained to consume fast imagery when we go into one of these blockbuster superhero movies. And although my modern moviegoer mentality kind of struggled in those moments to stay within the movie, I did stay within the movie. And that is just a testament to how much I enjoyed this movie. And the pacing had to be slow. As you know, this movie explores an elderly Professor Xavier and an aging Wolverine, and as such, as you age, life seems to slow down, and because the first half is so entrenched in that reality of theirs, it needed to be slow. And I think although I struggled to adjust with it, it was more on me than on the actual story that they were telling. So yes, I admit, my first critique of the movie is kind of a non-critique because, like I said, I blame it more on me as a moviegoer than I do on necessity. I should, as a moviegoer, be able to sit down and have to wait a little. Why? Because oftentimes it's in that waiting that we get the best characterization. Now, the next thing that I would say is something that surprised me in this movie is how quiet the tone was. Now, don't get me wrong, there's explosions and there's action sequence and there's gore and there's all that we would expect from a Wolverine movie, but ultimately that's not what the movie ends up being about. And not that those moments become superfluous, they just kind of become not the focus of the movie. We focus on what it means to be Professor Xavier, what it means to be Wolverine, and ultimately what it means to be X-23, Laura. And I think it's kind of amazing that I went into this movie that had explosions and action sequences, and I came out, and one of the main things that I thought of when I needed to describe this movie is that it was quiet. That shows how emotion done well in a film, even a superhero film, especially in a superhero film, can be more powerful than any of the imagery which we might typically expect of these films. And yeah, like I said, there's a lot of fighting and gruesomeness in this movie, but in a way, I don't even feel that that was necessarily why it needed an R rating. I think an R rating, just psychologically, was so that we understand this is an adult story that they're telling, that in a way almost requires an adult perspective to truly appreciate. Plus, yeah, children get, gruesomely hurt in this movie, but it's not superfluous, it's not unnecessary, it's emotionally real. Now, if I had to say what this movie was about, I'd have to say it's about relationships. And yeah, you could say like all movies are about relationships, but I would say this movie's so much more. And I think that this specific story that they're telling about both internal and external struggle could only be told through the backdrop of the X-Men. Us, as X-Men fans, have always been attracted to that personal struggle, social struggle that the X-Men have always represented. Now, there's 3 specific themes of relationship that I want to discuss that this movie touches upon. The first, and the one that I thought was the most powerful of the 3, was the relationship between Logan and Charles. Now, Wolverine has always struggled with self-identity, and Professor Xavier has always been the father of the X-Men, but I don't think those roles were ever as clearly presented and clearly defined as they were in this movie. And honestly, I think that's a sad thing. We've gotten so many X-Men movies and so many Wolverine movies, to then just now, as Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart are about to leave these roles, we suddenly get the characters as clearly defined as we've ever gotten them before. So in this movie, we do get Professor Xavier as the elderly father and Wolverine as the struggling son. Now I'll tell you, it's a beautiful relationship that we get in this movie, and one that is so deeply personal to both of these characters. Now, I'll tell you right away, I think Patrick Stewart needs to win some kind of award for this role, because I think it was a hard role for him to play. Yes, he's been playing Professor Xavier for however many years, but never to this capacity. They've never given him the opportunity to be presented in such a beautifully emotional light. The way Patrick Stewart balances the realities of aging and dementia versus that backdrop of fantastic powers and abilities and that reality, that X-Men reality, the way that both humanity and the X-Men kind of meet in this movie, especially through Patrick Stewart, are amazing, and many, many props to Patrick Stewart for his success in this role. Patrick Stewart's acting in conjunction with the writing in this movie just were for a beautiful combination, and nowhere was it more impacting than in this one moment early on in the film where Professor Xavier is in the throes of a dementia fit, and Logan, in a relatively uncharacteristically emotional moment, is kind of laying out these plans of buying a boat and taking Professor Xavier away and trying to talk Xavier down. So in this kind of angry delirium, Professor Xavier says, "No, you're just waiting for me to die." Oh, that line had me broken inside. If any of you have struggled with a parent or a grandparent that have had any kind of Alzheimer's or dementia, then you'll know, like me, why this moment in this movie was so significant. You know that that individual often spoke truths through fallacies. So we know that when Professor Xavier speaks this "you're waiting for me to die" line, he's speaking his fears, and it's such a beautiful moment in the film. And let me tell you, that's something that a father going through dementia would say to his child. So this relationship of father and son, which the writers and the director have crafted into this movie, is very believable, and we get it throughout the movie. Although Professor Xavier and Wolverine referring to each other as father and son is presented to us as a cover, we know that it's a truth. We believe them as father and son because of the realities that they've faced and the reality that they're facing. It's beautifully done. The next relationship that we get to explore in this movie is that of Logan versus Logan. And this is presented to us both figuratively and literally, which is wonderful. It is so awesome to see it. The first Logan versus Logan that we get is Logan versus his body. He's aging, he's struggling, what he was once able to rely on, he's no longer able to rely on, and psychologically that's working on him. And let me tell you, that is some beautifully raw and real characterization that they've pulled out of the Old Man Logan storyline. So yeah, figuratively we get Logan versus his body, but then we also get Logan versus himself. And we get that literal because we get the X-24 clone of Wolverine, which in a lot of ways represents a lot of the aspects that Wolverine always feared about himself, his feral side. So it's kind of amazing to see him fighting this younger, more feral version of himself that represents so much that he feared within himself. And let me tell you, although there were other villains in this movie, I don't think any of them were as relevant to the movie as the X-24 Wolverine clone. The final relationship that we get to experience in this movie is Logan and Laura, and that concept of the sins of the father continue onto the child. Laura is such an amazingly tragic heroine, and she's tragic because of what she represents. She represents everything that Logan, and to a lesser extent Professor Xavier, but mostly Logan, was never able to resolve. And it was that concept of self-discovery and eventual end to struggle. Because at the end of the movie, and boy was it an ending, we see that Laura will continue to struggle with her mutant abilities. She will still continue to struggle with simply being a mutant. And it's sad to know that these are things that Professor Xavier and Wolverine fought for but never were able to resolve. And let me tell you, if they're planning on moving forward with X-23 as the quintessential Wolverine, I am so excited. I think it's going to be exciting to see an older Laura, because I think it's going to be interesting to see Laura as an older individual struggle for both her own identity and the identity of her father, or what he struggled to contain within himself, and also the reality of the hopes of what her grandfather, Professor Xavier, wanted in this world but never got to see realized. Let me tell you, that is some wonderful emotional groundwork that they've set up for this X-23 character. Besides those interpersonal conflicts, this movie also kind of tackled some of this larger social issues through analogies. People always talk about art imitating life, and I think in this movie it was so much more apparent and so much more relevant considering the current social kind of zeitgeist that's going on in American politics and in American society, that this movie reflecting that, whether intentional or not, just blew my mind. Okay, so let's break it down. So we have the X-23 program mutants who, for all intents and purposes, are born in Mexico to Mexican women. They're considered different and unwanted in the larger society. Out of necessity, they decide to migrate out of that environment through the United States and into Canada, looking to stop being persecuted and looking for a better life. Do you get where I'm going with this? This is almost a perfect analogy for how immigration is viewed in this country and for the current mood towards the Syrian refugee crisis. Now, I don't know if the writers and the directors were going for that in this movie, but because of the current social political atmosphere which we're living in, it really brought that out in this movie. I couldn't help watch this movie and notice, oh, this is a Mexican woman that is desperate to find a good life for her child, and as such, she's running away into other countries while still being hunted down and persecuted for being different, for her child being different. Let me tell you, it's this kind of relevant storytelling that elevates movies to another level. And this movie proves how you can do it effectively in any genre, even the superhero one. Now, I don't mean to lay the heavy on you so thickly, but this movie called for it. And if you've seen this movie, which I'm assuming you have because you're watching this video, which is spoiler filled, you know that the ending of this movie was deeply, deeply depressing. And I have to say, if this is the new trend in these movies, to end these movies in a sad, make you think kind of way, then thank you, movie gods. We saw this type of emotionally heavy ending in Star Wars Rogue One. Because although the norm in a lot of these superhero action movies is to end on a happy note, I do think that this kind of morose, sad ending serves its purpose too. Because it's often in these endings that you walk out of the theater thinking. Because I think these kinds of uncertain endings force people who are naturally attracted to the banality of these superhero action blockbuster movies to think. It forces them to think. Because then suddenly these superhero movies aren't simply about escaping reality, but seeing it through a different lens. Because I mean, come on, these superhero movies are based off of comic books. And as any avid reader of comics knows, if you read a good comic, it makes you look at an issue through a lens that you never thought of. And sometimes you're exploring issues without even realizing that you're exploring a specific issue until you're done and have reprocessed the storyline. So in conclusion, I have to say, I loved Logan. I thought it was an amazing movie. I think You know, it's been thrown around the internet that this is gonna elevate and redefine the superhero genre. And to be honest, I hope it does, because I think there was a lot of very good storytelling, a lot of very good characterization in this movie, something that we've waited for a long time, and it was beautifully told. Alright guys, so that's my take on the new Logan movie. Now it's your turn. Let me know in the comments down below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was there anything I missed? That's it for now. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.